Can we pause real quick to just highlight some of the artists that I saw in the documentary that they mentioned? James Brown started it off. George Clinton and the Parliament Funkadelic. Just getting those two together alone is an extinction level event. Okay, switching genres. You mentioned doggone Korn, Metallica, Rage Against the Machine, and Limp Bizkit. Okay. And they also had Creed, and they also had Moby, and they also had Fatboy Slim, and they also had Jewel, and they also had Alanis Morissette, and a million other acts on top of that.
Rage Against the Machine for me was probably the highlight of it all. I mean, I love the Chemical Brothers too. DMX was sick, of course. Metallica. You can't shit on Metallica. I don't care what genre of music you're into. You can't shit on Metallica.
No, for their longevity alone.
So to be able to see this many acts in one spot, I mean, Dave Matthews Band, Foo Fighters, I mean, Offspring, these were the hottest albums of the 90s. And there was multiple stages going on. So you could, kind of go back and forth and catch different stuff. And then if you were a rave kid, then you had the DJs spinning all night. So it was like these kind of different genres of music that were all sort of merged together and obviously leaned towards rock. But, DMX held that stage down and that whole audience was singing along with him. And you can't shake your head at that. Like, that was pretty unprecedented for DMX to hold down the same crowd that Kid Rock did. So, because you would think that these are different crowds.
Right.
But there was an energy.
That with nu metal and how nu metal had a lot of hip hop elements incorporated into it. Kid Rock walks out in a pimp, furry hat and mink coat, all white,
in 100 degrees,
with a cane.
Right.
Just like Snoop Dogg or Bishop Don Juan.
Right.
And his mannerisms and definitely Fred Durst's mannerisms and even the way he dressed.
Yeah, even the way they dance and
Nookie video. It's a puffy jacket, a backwards hat, it's jeans. It's he's dressed in the way he moves is literally out of a Hype Williams video.
Right.
They kind of touch on that a little bit, but I wish they had gone further with it.
Yes, agreed.
I'm sorry, but like these new metal bands, specifically Limp Bizkit, Fred Durst, you gotta listen to it. He's rapping.
Yeah.
Like
that's white boy rap.
And so so hot take, bit of a reach, I'll admit, but it seems to me, particularly with the new metal piece and the audience that new metal brought to it at that point in time. So new metal being specifically Korn and Limp Bizkit as big icons, but let's just talk specifically about Limp Bizkit for now.
Okay.
And their popularity seems to me that they resonated clearly with an aggressive white male audience.
Absolutely.
And in the absence of that group of middle class and upper middle class white men, in the absence of having a true catastrophe in their generation. By that, I mean a war, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, women's lib, ethnic studies, indigenous lib, the deaths of all of your icons.
Right.
People forget Martin Luther King and RFK were killed within 4 months of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And Malcolm X.
This
is all within a year or two. Right.
You know what I mean? So you lose JFK, John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy.
You lose the heads Malcolm of the Panthers,
and
Black
Martin,
Panthers,
and all the Panthers. Everybody but Bobby Seale got killed.
Right. Although the Weather Underground group, that was the violent white upper middle class group that aligns with the Black Panthers, not only survived after blowing up several federal buildings, but I don't believe any of them went to jail. Most of them did not go to jail. And if they did, it was very little amount of time. And most of them became professionals and writers.
Yeah. And now they're
and they'll tell you that
for their shit.
Right. And they'll tell you we're alive because we're white.
Obama was mentored a bit by David Ayer, who was part of that group.
Yes, he was part of that group. I mean, so these people had careers and their Black counterparts were dead.
No, I have never heard anybody actually point that out before. Holy shit.
The Weather Underground. Damn. And they got their name from a Bob Dylan song. I know about the Weather Underground. See, that's the shit they don't teach you in school. That the Black Panthers were not the violent part of the civil rights movement. The upper middle class white college students who formed the group, the Weather Underground, were the violent arm of the civil rights movement. And the reason they could be is because they knew they had resources. Although they did hide for 2 decades before resurfacing. I mean, they literally blew up federal buildings across the United States, at least a dozen, and lived to tell the tale.
But the Panthers
were
one
systematically
shootout with
executed.
the
Systematically
police,
executed.
that the police started, and everybody but Bobby Seale and
shooting them in their sleep. Yeah, shooting them while they're sleeping. I mean, let's not forget these people were in their 20s. These were young. Panthers were young people.
Mm-hmm. And when I say Kwame Ture, I mean Stokely Carmichael.
Yeah.
He and Bobby Seale were the only ones that lived.
I mean, it's shameful. Have you seen Judas and the Messiah?
Yeah, Judas and the Black Messiah.
Yeah.
That's why I mentioned.
I thought it was amazing.
I mentioned Hanging Out with Albright, whom you might remember from Berkeley.
Yeah.
Judas and the Black Messiah was produced by Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler also produced Space Jam. Space Jam is a 90-minute commercial. I feel like it was a one for me, one for them type of thing, where it's like, you're going to give me the entire budget I need to do this Black Panther story that I know you don't want to write a check for.
Right.
In exchange, I will literally produce a 90-minute movie or a 90-minute commercial for you in the form of Space Jam 2.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. In all my years of pre-Berkeley, when I was a lot further left than I am now, and being at Berkeley, which you're familiar with, I'm sure everyone watching and listening is familiar with, I've never actually come across a comparison between the Panthers and the Weather Underground. So that's why I reacted that way, because holy fucking shit, that's a really good point. And maybe I'm just a fucking idiot for just now realizing this, but yeah, the Weather Underground was way more violent. I know that. But comparing them to the Panthers are all dead except for 2. Right. The Weather Underground not only lived, but thrived.
Right. These people went on with their lives.
Progressivism, progressive politics, and they're looked at as the OGs now.
They are looked at the OGs. And real talk, they are Gs. Like, make no mistake about that. These people took it to another level. I mean, these were
Black people
white
try
kids.
To blow up some buildings. Holy shit.
Right. I mean, their perspective was, you are the part of the problem or part of the solution. And that there was no middle ground for them, that you are either aligned with your Black and brown brothers or you weren't. And that you had a responsibility to use your privilege to right the wrongs that had been done to these communities. And they were not fucking around.
But I wonder if they would admit that, yeah, the only reason we're still alive is because we're white. I respect the fuck out of it.
I believe they would. I absolutely believe they would. And the reason I believe they would is because they know firsthand that the people that they worked with are dead. And they're not.
And did more than. The Panthers never tried to blow up a building.
Absolutely.
And even when niggas get wild and riot and whatnot, they might burn down an empty building.
Right.
But they're not going to blow up a building with people in it. I mean, if it has happened, that's very few and far between with Black militant radicals.
Yeah.
They were considered hot shots at cops.
Right. I mean, the Weather Underground was considered a domestic terrorist group by the FBI. So there was no disputing that the FBI saw them as a threat to the security of the United States.
As just as no worse of a threat than or possibly less of a threat.
Right.
Than the fucking Black Panthers who weren't blowing up buildings.
Exactly.
But they went and killed them.
Yeah.
Kicked in the door, start shooting.
Yeah.
Why? They're Black. So we can shoot them all, and then we'll all just say that one of them shot at us. So that gave us permission to kill everybody in here.
Yeah. I mean, and they were renowned for blowing up and specifically targeting government buildings and banks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think actually there wasn't
with people in it.
Yeah. And they actually, a couple of them died themselves.
Today.
What'd you say?
They would still be considered domestic terrorists today. Because like you could say, oh, well, the FBI back then, J. Edgar Hoover, everybody was a terrorist.
No, they'd be considered a terrorist now.
Yeah.
And they actually lost a couple of members of their own, because I remember that there was an explosion that occurred in a Greenwich Village. That's where they were building bombs, was in a Greenwich Village townhouse. So that tells you they had resources. But none of them died in any of the bombings that they did, interestingly enough. So, like, for example, they bombed the Pentagon, which was in retaliation for the U.S. bombing Hanoi. And then they bombed the United States Department of State building, and that was in retaliation for the U.S. escalating the war in Vietnam. Like, this was the not fucking around crew. And one of the reasons they were so hated was because they aligned with the Black Power movement and the anti-Vietnam movement. They're very interesting. They have a very interesting history. Right. And I wish they taught these things in schools, but they don't want students to know this because they don't want to encourage anybody to start blowing up buildings.
Right. They don't want anybody to take it too far.
Right.
Interesting.
And these guys did, and they lived to tell the tale because they were white.
And I figured they were anti-capitalist. I didn't know that how aligned they were with the Black Power movement.
Absolutely.
They were. Interesting.
Absolutely.
So these weren't some corny Bernie bro leftists. No offense to any Bernie bros.
Right. No. These
were radical
students took it to another level.
This was militant progressivism or
yeah. I mean, these were the people who, when you went into the post office, their faces were hanging there, like most wanted.
Most wanted. Interesting.
But I mean, again, so was Martin Luther King.
Or capitalist, or some mixture. Did they have an economic philosophy? I'm sure I could Google this, but since you seem to already be very well versed, please let me know.
I don't remember what their philosophy was with regard to the economic aspect of things. I just remember their anti-Vietnam stance and their alignment with the Panther, because I was teaching a segment on the Panthers in class. So I leaned into some broad stroke information that I knew about the Weather Underground. So I've never done a deep dive into like their official policies, other than knowing they are anti-war, specifically at the time anti-Vietnam, and part of the Black Power movement. And so much so that they did use bombs to blow up banks, which would lead me to believe that they were against capitalism and corporate greed if they're blowing up banks. Mm-hmm. And that they believe that to every evil act that a government incites, that we, the people, had the right to respond in favor. And therefore, it warranted a revolution because of it. I think they set off over like 24 bombs.
Wow.
Yeah, all through the 70s for about a decade.
And they were allowed to live.
Yeah.
And they're not still hiding the fact that they were in the Weather Underground. They're like, yep, that was me.
Yeah.
I was blowing up some buildings. You goddamn right. I blew that shit up.
I think they wouldn't come out, but like there was a messaging to it that they knew it was them. But they were also they also had a strange way of meeting. Like, you had to be at the last meeting to know where the next meeting was. There was no phone calls and emails, and you know what I mean? So it was really like more of a word of mouth. You had to be in the know to know. And they were able to pull this off because, I mean, they bombed the Capitol in 1971, the Pentagon in 1972, the State Department in 1975. And they didn't get, they were on the FBI's most wanted list, but they believed at some point there was almost like 1,000 of them.
And now all these niggas, most wanted list be damned. They're out here, they're writing books, getting interviews, speaking engagements. Wow.
Yeah.
They're alive, and they are essentially rightfully held in high esteem in radical circles for what they did, and thereby there is an audience there for content. So yeah, they're writing books, speaking circuit, etc. Whereas, I mean, I remember I actually talked to Bobby Seale when I was in community college, because I was I reached out to him and everybody else who was part of the original Chicago 7+1, being Bobby, to see if I could use like my club that I was a president of. We had a pretty healthy budget for some stupid reason, but I was going to see if we could try to do some kind of reunion there.
Mm-hmm.
He fucking hates Tom Steyer,
Interesting.
who went on to become a senator, a state senator. and he has a $10,000 speaking fee, and his website is pretty shitty. This is all before the movie. Okay, this was back in 2008 or 9. But yeah, basically, like financially, he wasn't doing as well. It was clear he hadn't really gotten his flowers, basically. Right. Hopefully now that changes with the movie having come out.
Mm-hmm.
And Bobby was actually featured, in that movie. And what's the movie that Aaron Sorkin wrote and directed that was about the trial itself, where Bobby Seale was more prominently featured? The Trial of the Chicago 7.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's 7, and then Bobby Seale, because his trial got thrown out because of what they did to him, is he's the 8th. So that's why some people call it the Chicago 8. Some people call it the Chicago 7. There's a really cool documentary called Chicago 10. And the documentary, which came out 11 or 12 years ago, is what inspired me to try to pursue that. Because, yeah, the Moorpark College Multicultural Club, we were able to get like a $20,000 budget to try to book people. Because I just like showed up at a meeting one day. I was like, can we have all this money? And they were like, sure. But we weren't able to book all of these people. But yeah, so we should do a deep dive on the trial of the Chicago 7, the movie, and what actually happened. So maybe we just do the trial of the Chicago 7, Chicago 10, the documentary, and the movie, the trial of the Chicago 7, all in one piece.